amplificado, donde tus derechos salen a la luz y disipan el miedo, donde tus aportes a la sociedad se evidencian, donde se reconoce que tus luchas reivindican derechos para todas y todos. Radio Jornalera destaca a la gente humilde que pelea por sus derechos a pesar de sus circunstancias de despojo y marginación. Eleva a los individuos y sus luchas y muestra cómo la clase trabajadora y humilde puede ser agente de cambio cuando se organiza, cuando se defiende y cuando tiene una lectura correcta de su propia realidad. Radio Jornalera provee el espacio para aprender de los invitados e invitadas sobre sus vidas, lo que les motiva a seguir adelante, sus virtudes y desafíos y hasta su música y poesía favorita. Radio Jornalera recalca el trabajo de activistas, organizadores, educadores y algunas celebridades, sus causas, sus campañas, sus estrategias, sus tácticas y los reveses más duros en el perenne quehacer de formar líderes para hacer el mundo más justo, más humano, más inclusivo. Para cambiar el mundo, primero hay que conocer a las personas que sobreviven las injusticias y políticas públicas groseras. Hay que apoyar y solidarizarse con sus luchas, porque desde abajo se defiende a todo mundo. Radio Jornalera, donde los anhelos y el sentir del pueblo trabajador cobran vida.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Jenny Garcia. I work for an organization called Detention Watch Network. And this is the first episode of what we're calling Rotten to the Core. It's a radio show that will be airing periodically on Radio Jornalera and Radio Cosecha.
Still figuring out the schedule. Rest assured, there will be more episodes.
Yeah, so we're in the cabina, Radio Jornalera's cabina, which is located in Highland Park. And before we get started with the show, we do want to send some solidarity to the students that are currently on strike at Voorhees Mall on Rutgers University. They are demanding that President Jonathan Holloway divest from Rutgers investments that they have at Tel Aviv University. And we want to send solidarity with all the Palestinian students, especially after there was a targeted attack and vandalism that occurred at the Center for Islamic Life at College Ave. So while we're here, we're also sending solidarity to the folks over there because they're demanding divestment for Rutgers from Israel, and we're demanding divestment from private prisons from the city of Elizabeth, the state of New Jersey, and from the Biden administration.
And it's also really important to note that today is a global day of action in opposition to the genocide in Gaza. So for folks who want to get involved with that, there's undoubtedly a group in your community working to ensure that the United States no longer bankrolls that genocide.
For sure. Free Palestine. So to talk a little bit about what this show is going to be about. So Rotten to the Core is going to investigate one of the private prison companies that we should all know and hate, especially if you're from the state of New Jersey, named CoreCivic. So CoreCivic was formerly known as the Corrections Corporations of America, and then they had to rebrand because of really bad publicity. It's a Nashville-based company, so it's based in Tennessee, and they own, lease, and operate prisons, immigration detention centers, residential reentry centers in the U.S. They own or manage 74 prisons and jails in the U.S. with a total capacity of 75,000 people, which actually constitutes 56% of all privately owned prison beds in the United States. So why are we talking about CoreCivic in the state of New Jersey? So CoreCivic actually operates the last remaining ICE detention center in New Jersey, the Elizabeth Detention Center, or what we call EDC, in Elizabeth, New Jersey. U.S. Immigration Enforcement, so before ICE was ICE, has been detaining and separating families at the Elizabeth Detention Center for nearly 30 years. And just a side note, Mayor Bulwidge of the city of Elizabeth has been the mayor of Elizabeth throughout the whole time that the Elizabeth Detention Center has existed in Elizabeth. So in future episodes, we'll get into like the nitty gritty of CoreCivic as a company, the Elizabeth Detention Center, but we thought it'd be important to examine how the Elizabeth Detention Center became the last remaining ICE detention center in the state of New Jersey. So for people who don't know, there was also 3 other counties who were detaining immigrants on behalf of ICE. So in order to provide some like context, we kind of want to talk a little bit with some of the organizers that were who were there shutting down the county jails to really put us set the scene on how we are in the place that we are.
So in August of 2021, New Jersey passed a law that banned jails and detention centers from, quote, entering into, renewing, or extending immigration detention agreements with ICE. And Hudson County, Bergen County, Essex County terminated their contracts with ICE, but CoreCivic, joined by the Biden administration, actually sued the state of New Jersey. And Elizabeth Detention Center is now the last remaining detention center in the state of New Jersey.
Okay, so Andre, I'm going to ask you some questions to take us back a little bit. So we're currently in 2024, but I think where we're going to kind of like start the story for the podcast is going to be in 2020. So obviously what happened in 2020, the pandemic started, but we specifically want to go back to 2021. So I wanted to ask, how did organizers get New Jersey to ban ICE contracts? And how did we shut down ICE detention in Bergen, Hudson, and Essex County?
Yeah, so first, it's just really important to remember that people have been organizing against these ICE contracts from the moment they were signed. And people both inside and outside ICE detention centers have been working to shut them down since their inception. But there's also no doubt that the material conditions in and around 2020 shifted dramatically to expand the window of political possibility. And there are a few key catalysts that we really need to take into account in order to understand why and how this happened. The first relevant item, right, was the election of Donald Trump in 2016.
Yikes.
Yikes, indeed. And again, immigration detention in New Jersey and throughout the US has long been an apparatus of class war against the international working class. And it's long been an instrument of empire and a tool of structural racism. But for years, New Jersey politicians had been able to hide behind platitudes about the rule of law or national security as they put immigrants in cages in exchange for a flood of cash from the federal government.
And before you keep going, Andre, I just want to reiterate again, immigration detention in New Jersey and throughout the U.S. has long been an apparatus of class war against the international working class, an instrument of the empire and a tool of structural racism. Just wanted to underscore that.
So Donald Trump, right, when he was elected in 2016 with his fascist and genocidal rhetoric and his explicitly racist justifications for deportation for immigration detention, along with the sudden media interest in the human costs of the American deportation system, really shattered that paradigm.
Mhm.
And New Jersey is hardly a left-wing polity, but Donald Trump has never been a popular figure here. And so for years, Democratic New Jersey politicians were flailing as they failed to justify their complicity with Trump's immigration policy.
Mhm.
And the New Jersey electorate, of course, was increasingly furious and increasingly baffled by this. So the second relevant factor that we have to discuss unquestionably is the COVID pandemic. And there's really been an attempt in recent years to sort of erase from cultural memory just how catastrophic the pandemic has been. But it really has been a global tragedy on an almost unimaginable scale. And for those detained by ICE, the situation was even worse.
Mhm.
According to the New York Times in April of 2021, the rate of infections inside ICE detention facilities was 20 times that of the US population overall.
Yep.
And this may have been was shocking, but it was hardly surprising. People detained by ICE had been telling us for years that the conditions inside ICE detention, both in New Jersey and throughout the US, were horrific, dangerous, and degrading.
Mhm.
And long before the pandemic, immigrants have been dying in private prisons and county jails in New Jersey due to vicious abuse and callous neglect from guards. This neglect and abuse and the dire conditions that people had been suffering under for years ensured that when the COVID pandemic came along, people in ICE detention were uniquely vulnerable to it. So all of this came to a head in 2020. But county freeholders, state senators, and other opportunistic politicians did their best to ignore these crisis conditions and would have been happy to watch the money roll in from the federal government as immigrants died in their state. But a broad-based coalition which regularly organized protests, direct actions, and civil disobedience, both inside and outside of ICE detention centers in New Jersey, made it impossible for the status quo to be maintained. Organizers shut down an ICE black site, right? They were blocking deportations.
Black status.
Yeah, so there was a building in Frelinghuysen Avenue in Newark, New Jersey, actually right along the Newark Elizabeth border, where immigrants were essentially renditioned shortly before being deported. This was a very inconspicuous site. It was a business park shared with random businesses that contracted with Newark Airport. And ICE obviously did not have their name on the door, their name on the billboard.
Mhm.
Um, but they were operating outside of that site. That was it was and is a key instrument in the apparatus of deportations in this region.
Mhm.
And organizers managed to shut down that black site
Mhm.
for the better part of a day. Folks were, glued and chained to the entrances. ICE vans that approached the black site had to turn around and leave. Um, and that made a material difference for anyone that ICE was planning to target that day. Um, and while people were organizing things like this, disrupting fundraisers from complicit politicians, folks inside ICE detention were also organizing hunger strikes, and were also really making it clear that they would not accept the
Mhm.
continuing conditions that they were living under, and that the conditions in New Jersey ICE detention were absolutely unacceptable and could not continue. And ultimately, this broad coalition of folks inside and outside New Jersey ICE detention really polarized the public and forced politicians to respond to the demands of folks inside ICE detention and the broader New Jersey electorate. And thanks to this coalition, New Jersey passed AB 5207, which banned ICE contracts, and Bergen, Essex, and Hudson, uh, they no longer detain people on ICE's behalf. Um, so our guests today were part of that coalition. Uh, First up is Heidi Torres, who organized with people detained by ICE in New Jersey, along with their family members and community members. Uh, I'm Andre Berger. I'm also part of Movimiento Cosecha, organized together. So, Heidi, how are you doing
Heidi?
today?
Andre, I'm impressed. You guys are amazing on the mic, and congratulations on your new program.
you.
I feel very honored to be here. I'm a little bit sick, so if you guys see me with tissues, it's because I'm recovering from a cold. Yes, the changing temperatures and the weather's not helping much. Yeah, thank you so much. And that was like in a very brief history, right? I feel like you really summarizing, right? You can unpack all the stories, all the actions, and the different things that we did on the grounds to make a noise and to put pressure, right, on New Jersey legislation to like pass the bill and to also make us, like this is an issue, right, that's affecting all of our communities, right? How people get sucked into the pipeline, right, through like the core systems in New Jersey, the different like just like venues, right, where like immigrants are being detained and then put into like cages.
Okay, so our first question specifically is like, can you tell us about how Movimiento Cosecha got involved in supporting people who were detained in 2020 during the pandemic and beyond?
Yeah, so I think like we just I've seen pictures around here Radio Jornalera, so we have newspapers in Radio Cosecha, right, from like many people, right, throughout the years that have protested outside of the Elizabeth Detention Center or any of the three jails that previously had a contract with immigration, right, with ICE. And I feel like we have a lot of like lessons, right? We learn from them. We send the pictures, the same issues, the same patterns, and I remember, just like reading about things that were happening, right? And like really from a textbook, like how retaliation would work, for people that immigrant detainees who were outspoken, right? Who were like trying to organize inside the detention facilities. And once I started like understanding more about like getting into it, right? Talking to people on the phone about, hey, like we want to organize a hunger strike, right? Like how do we do this? But before I even got into it, I never thought I was gonna get into that. And I remember going with Marlene, who was here a couple of weeks ago, right, for a different show. We were just like 2020 we were like doing mutual aid, mostly doing like rapid response, like helping families connect with resources for food pantries, helping in the food pantries, delivering food, and also supporting um families connecting with doctors, right? Like doctors who like from Harvard University who wanted to give like connect with the community members, talk about their fears of like contracting COVID and like a lot of different things. It was mostly mutual aid, right? And then we were like listening, to and and watching like the videos of people protesting outside of Bergen County, right, jail, and just like talking and about hunger strike, and I was like, wow, this is happening. And people inside, right, like they would put them on the megaphone, right, and I remember those first rallies that were not organized by any like organizations. Really, it was like collectives, right? Like of people that were getting together and were understanding, hey, like this is all connected, right? To like the pandemic just exacerbated all the like poverty, right? The conditions of people who are detained, like saying that when we don't the guards don't wear masks, right? They come in sick, right? The fear that they had. So we were listening to all of that, and I remember like I don't even know how, right? At some point, we went for this first rally. We're like talking to Marlene, like how do we like what role do we play here, right? Because we also come from the mindset that it is a collective work. So like how do we join? How do we support the efforts, right? Of people pressuring. Doing the hunger strikes to pressure immigration to let them out, right? Like that was the tactics. Like I am gonna continue this hunger strike until I'm free.
Right now in Washington too. Like it's
Yes,
a tactic that people use. Yeah.
right, and has in use. And I'm not very familiar with like organizing inside prisons or organizing, and how do you better support people who are leading the fight in the inside, right?
Mhm.
How do you prepare for the the like phone calls and people are like telling you that I'm gonna be transferred if I continue with this, like so all the stuff. So first we just like were like I remember like the first thing we did was like we need to connect with families. That's what I told Marlene. Like
Yeah.
we see everybody doing that, like other like parts of the ecology, right? And we were like we need to connect with families, right?
Yeah.
Because they're also they're suffering, like we like I remember learning about the visitation protocols at Bergen County, and like telling Andrea like how do we make sure the families are able to visit, right? So I remember like we had to organize that, right? We were connecting with people on the inside, and we asked them like who do we call, like tell us like who do we call to connect with you, right? And connect with them, and they would give us like their family's phone numbers. I would talk on the phone. Marlene and I were like creating this WhatsApp group and just adding people. Were asking, hey, like there's a hunger strike happening, and the families were as afraid because there wasn't much information coming to them in Spanish, right? So we thought,
Mhm.
okay, let's do a Facebook group so we can start like giving to them updates. Because but the things that they would do at retaliation was that they would cut the lines, right? The phone lines, so they wouldn't talk to their family members, and they were worried.
Mhm.
So that's how we got involved. It's like, okay, we know that we see the lack of like connecting this to the American community, to why is an issue, explaining why people do hunger strikes, connecting families with resources, organizing with the families as well. And we can definitely do that. So that is one of the first steps we took when we started organizing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Just being like led by what the families decided and like what was best for them at the time. At the time, did they like cancel in person visitation? Was it only virtual or like yeah? How was that for the families trying to see their
Yeah,
loved ones?
so we were learning. It was different from all the detention centers, right? For I remember for Bergen County, they you had to do in person visitation, but it was also very. It was a whole protocol. The families were not aware. Many times, like
Mhm.
you had to email this person at certain hours and wait for confirmation. It wasn't like you could just, like could do it any day, right? Or like could get approved, and it was a time limit as well. And there was also the fear for families who were undocumented and
Yeah.
were wondering, can I come into the jail, right? So we talked to one of the lawyers at AFSC, a good friend of Cosecha, and can you just give like a small workshop? We also had we had that workshop, right, about like um like visiting people right inside detention centers or like the jails that had the contract. And that's how we did it, and they feel more confident after we get them reassurance that yeah, you're able to get in, right, and this is how you can do it.
Mhm.
And Marlene and I used the van, and I remember one day we had all the families come in one day, to do visits at Bergen County. And like we had a previous call in the morning with someone, good friend of mine, his name is Tristan, who organizes in Georgia. And I just giving advice to the families, right? And it was really hard. And many of the men who were detained had kids. So we like you're able to bring in the kids, and it was very painful because they couldn't understand why is my dad, like through a glass. And
Mhm.
the guards were mean. Sometimes if your name didn't match your ID, or you guys we didn't come like in time, like they would not let people in. And so
Wow.
it was
Awful. And
painful
people
to see
sometimes
that.
travel like really far from like South
Yeah.
Jersey. Yeah, it's not just they take
Yeah.
off work.
And that's what we saw. We also started seeing like this pattern of like most of the families that we connected with were in South Jersey, like Mammoth County, and
Mhm.
then you start learning about the Mammoth like county, police department, like so
Mhm.
the county like relation with with the cops, and the courts, and you start seeing like, oh wow, like this is a relation there. That's how like so many of those people who are detained like come
A
from South
pattern,
Jersey
yeah,
area. Yeah.
for sure. Thanks so much, Heidi. Okay, so we do have an item here that we want to show the audience and to show you and bring you back to memory lane for Andre. You mentioned it a little bit, the action that happened outside of the black site in Newark. So could you describe to us? We have this prop here. I'm trying not to break anything or to hit anybody with it. Maybe we can put it across the table. Hold on. Let's not spill anything. Okay. So I think the both of you were there, right? So just talking about, because you were saying that the black site in Newark is in this like inconspicuous building. And I think like it's helpful for people who have never been to the Elizabeth Detention Center to also understand it's in this converted industrial warehouse that's right outside of Newark Airport. So first of all, like while you're there, and for the people that are detained, they are constantly hearing this flood of airplanes going over them. So just imagine yourself literally facing deportation, potentially being ripped apart from your family, and what you're hearing constantly overhead is the sound of airplanes, literally the threat of actually being deported. So just to put into some context that like ICE purposely puts people in these buildings that are really isolated from the community. So like if you were driving past Elizabeth Detention Center, you would not know it was even there. So just to put into context, so the Newark Black site is also this really inconspicuous building that you guys did some research. You realized that it was part of the apparatus, just like the sheriff's departments, just like the police departments are part of this apparatus that is deporting people. I wanted to ask if you could share any reflections, what you remember from that day, and why it was just like a beautiful moment of solidarity of like really disrupting and cutting off the pipeline.
Yeah. Okay. So going back, we did a lot of organizing through the phone, right? Because you cannot see people. Of course, we like never wanted to go have any records of us, doing these visits, right?
Mhm.
And it was everything through the phone. Also, gotta be careful because all calls are recorded, right, by the facility. And we were like, I would just ask questions like when someone was in the process of being deported, like what happens, and they will tell you. I think this is all like common knowledge, right? If you're organizing these detention centers, it's like they're gonna do a COVID test the day before, they're gonna cut your commissary, right? They're gonna do all these things. And then I remember I had like a list, of like people, and I made a spreadsheet like just on my notes being like, okay, this person's gonna get detained, and I will follow like the track, once you. And it was easier for not easier, but it was a very straightforward pattern for people from Mexico, right? Because they can just drop you at the border, right?
Mhm.
And then you have to just walk the bridge, right? Whichever point of entry, right? But for people from Central America and Africa and other countries, it was more of like a pattern, right? You had to go to the airport, right? This eye black side that you were mentioning. And I remember I just like, I'm gonna call you when you get home, like because usually they would like their family members, right? Or someone will wait for them, or you know, and then like they will call me back when they were already in their home countries, and I would just ask them like, what happened?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what did you go through? And we were like starting putting pieces together of like, oh, people are going through this. Like, you don't go straight to the airport. Like, you go to this facility, right? And they would have like a vivid memory of like, and I would ask them like, what did you see? Like, where like what did they ask you, right? And they would tell us like, look, they chained us and they took us to the site, right? And this was like that. And sometimes people didn't have the travel documents, and what would they do is that they would just make like force you to sign. Like at that moment, it's just immigration and the people and immigrant detainees, right? Like they can do whatever they want to you,
Mhm.
and literally what they will grab your fingerprints, like and just put them there. So as like a way of like you're signing anything, they have a expire. They don't care at all. Like when people tell me, oh, you need to have a valid passport or you need to sign this document, will not, they don't care. Like they will fabricate that for you, right? And so we would like talk to them, and over here we like started like kind of like mapping, like, okay, what, like, where, like, oh, you told me this building, and we were just like follow through around and see. And we had a lot of people, not just us, like who were like never done, like were connected to the immigrant rights movement, right? But they wanted to help out, and they're like, yeah, I cannot come to a rally, but I can definitely scout or do something, right? So that's what we did. to track this site, right? And once we were there, we like planned, and with everything, with like some friends who had already had experience using them, we did training. It's not like you just go and block this area. Like it took like months of planning, right, to make sure that we had the right location. They were like, and that's of the day too as well, right? We like knew that they collect, where do they go first? And this is a lot of detail work, because you gotta know where they go first. Like three, by that time they still had three the detention centers, right?
Directly, which is like one of the arguments that ICE is making to
Yeah.
keep the Elizabeth Detention Center open, that it's so close directly to 3 airports in the area, but they're not sending people directly to the airport. They're going to the black site, they're transferring them to Louisiana.
Yeah.
So it's this whole pattern that they're just like draining people and weighing them down as they transfer them.
Yeah, they do. And you know, they just like stop collecting people. It's horrible how they do it.
Yeah.
It's humanizing. And like
Yeah.
you go from one detention center from Massachusetts, and then you go to New Jersey, and then you
Mhm.
keep going all the way, like, you know, south. So there are many ways. If ICE want to transfer you, they will do it.
Yeah.
When people were doing hunger strikes inside the facility, in the 3 different facilities, one day I would talk to someone, the next day they were gone, and they would tell us like once they arrived to New York, most of them were sent to New York or Louisiana. They would tell me like they just grab in the middle of the night a private plane, a jet, you know, like a van, just kidnap you like that, and then you'll be sent to the other location. So you would not organize with the people inside, because they always target those who were able to bring people together. Just like
Yep.
we've seen, you know, any movement, right? Like other leaders, right? That's how they kill the movement, you know, because they take it. Like really everybody, like intimidate people. Like if you keep doing something, I remember some of them, like the men who were on hunger strike, would tell me that it's like, oh, we are going to and like make your immigration case even worse if you don't stop.
Yeah. Like directly threatening people
Yeah.
for their organizing work. Heidi, well, first we wanted to thank you so much for being on the show. First, because I think you are a beautiful example of what it means to, you know, organize alongside families, take the lead of the people who are inside ICE detention, take the lead of what the family actually wants, and also wanted to acknowledge that, like, as an organizer in doing this, that's like a lot of emotional labor you did to get a phone call from somebody or to speak to somebody one day and the next day that they're literally deported. I just want to honor the fact that a lot of the labor that usually happens because women are organizing together is really heavy. So I just want you to know how much we appreciate you, not only as a comrade, but as a friend for all the work that you did. And thanks for sharing and going back and talking to this about us.
Our next guest today is Amy Torres, who is also part of that coalition that helped to get this law passed and shut down those detention centers. So, Amy, thanks so much for coming onto this very experimental show. We appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so Amy is actually the executive director of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. Amy, yeah, thanks again for coming on the show, for joining in and fitting us into your schedule. So before we get started, we did want to ask you a question about your background a little bit. So we saw that you spent some time organizing in New York City. And okay, we were going to ask you, what state do you think is better, New York and New Jersey? But we're actually not going to ask you that question. But we saw that you did a lot of coalition building in New York. And I think one of the reasons why, you know, it was so incredible to see the passing of AB 5207 is that it was a large coalition of people who made that possible. So we wanted to ask, like, did you bring anything back to New Jersey from coalition building in New York? And if you could talk a little bit, like, what makes New Jersey so unique that it made it possible for AB 5207 to be passed?
Sure. Yeah, I think, I'm really grateful for the time that I had to work in New York. I always did so as a commuter. I was living in New Jersey the whole time that I was working there. And this is actually a great question because as I was working in New York, one of the neighborhoods that my organization at the time was based in was South Brooklyn, Sunset Park. And folks may remember, like right before the 2020 pandemic happened, there was this huge story about plainclothes ICE officers trying to arrest someone. And as they were making that arrest, family members of that person saw what was happening and thought that he was getting jumped because, again, they were plainclothes officers. They ran out to defend their brother, and one of the ICE officers shot one of the brothers in the face. And it made national news. And because it was a neighborhood that I worked in, you know, I was called to action pretty quickly. It was just around the corner from a school. It was horrific for so many reasons. But I remember as we were camping out outside the hospital, there was a rumor that ICE actually did get the other brother and they were transferring him to Hudson County, which is where I lived. So I was able to, at that time, you know, reach into my personal network and sort of understand what organizing was happening around the Hudson County Jail, which at that time was in its final year of the contract of that time. So folks were already really paying close attention to what was happening in Hudson. And then, of course, you know, just a month or so later, with the COVID-19 pandemic, New Jersey had one of the highest infection and death rates in its state and local prisons and jails in the nation. So yeah, there was a lot of interlap in my worlds at that time. But I think it highlights just how ICE uses whatever resource necessary to them to push people around. And, you know, especially with that story, I think it really highlighted for me how ICE is able to avoid scrutiny because all of the journalists who had descended upon the hospital after that shooting, they didn't want to go to Hudson County, even though it's not that far away. And that brother was really, really poorly treated, you know, food and water withheld, put in really deplorable conditions, solitary confinement. And it, you know, I think that story is, like so many other stories, emblematic of how ICE is really smart in using places that are, you know, seemingly far away or can be far enough away from media to avoid scrutiny and, you know, public opinion. Yeah, and what makes New Jersey unique? I mean, you know, there's so many things that make New Jersey the best place. New Jersey, it all of the things that make it good can also sometimes make it bad. But starting with the good, you know, we all know this, folks that are on today's show, New Jersey's so incredibly diverse. I think often when we talk about immigration as a national issue, people say, oh, immigration it's a Texas issue, it's a Florida issue, it's California, it's New York, but it's New Jersey that has the second highest proportion of immigrants to our total population. So nearly 1 in 4 people in New Jersey are foreign born. Over 40% of New Jersey kids come from an immigrant household. So we're a really, really immigrant-rich state. A lot of folks who have direct experience or have loved ones who have direct experience with the immigration system. And I think for that reason, it makes the advocacy and the organizing that happens here really special because people get very, very involved for personal reasons. There's the obvious moral reasons that people want to get involved. But I think, you know, historically too, New Jersey as the place where, you know, Ellis Island is located on our shores. I think there's a history too about like what immigration looks like. And so people don't have to reach very far back in living memory or in their family history to, yeah, understand the cruelties of our current immigration system.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for that, Amy. So because this is an episode where we're providing a lot of context to people and just like really like basic information about the Elizabeth Detention Center, for those who have never heard of AB 5207, because everybody here in this room and obviously you know what that is, but for somebody who isn't really involved in the immigrant rights movement yet, but is looking to, can you just describe briefly what is AB 5207 and why it's so important to immigrant and non-immigrant communities alike, which you touched on a little bit about how like beautifully diverse New Jersey is.
Yeah, so AB 5207 is a state law that says that contracting with the federal government for immigration detention is no longer allowed. That's the essence of what it does. It's actually a very short law, and
Okay.
states do this all the time. We don't want to participate in the blah 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 industry, right? So we're
Mhm.
forbidding contracts between state and local entities for contracting with whoever it might be, right? In this case, New Jersey applied it to federal immigration detention. And that law at the time that it passed was future focused. So it banned the
Okay.
renewal of any existing contracts, it
Yeah.
banned the extension of them or the expansion of them if at the time contractors wanted more beds. And it banned any new contracts from being able to be started too. But what was really interesting about the campaign for that law is that we needed things to move really quickly. I mentioned, the deadly, like very, very deadly and serious conditions in New Jersey jails and prisons in 2020. And in fall of 2020, there was a request for information from ICE to ask jails and prisons what their capacity was to start a new contract and extend ICE beds in the region. And this is all pre-election, still under the Trump administration. We're
Mhm.
still reeling from these really, really deadly conditions inside
Yeah.
prisons and jails. And folks took a look at that request for information and thought, New Jersey is ripe for expansion, and we really need something that is going to quickly pass and prevent this from coming. Because as urgent as our fight to shut things down is, we're never going to be able to shut them all down if thousands of new beds descend on the state.
Yeah.
It would have just been, I mean, it would have
Yeah.
been devastating.
Yeah.
Given all of the money that was coming in to these New Jersey counties from these contracts, given what both you and Heidi have discussed, the ways in which ICE retaliated against organizers on the inside, and given this political status quo that had existed for so many years, uh, why was this campaign successful? How ultimately did this law get passed? And what do you think we can learn for future campaigns, and in particular, for the effort to shut down Elizabeth Detention Center?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons for the movement, and we're still learning them because the law is being challenged right now by CoreCivic, who operates the Elizabeth Detention Center. I think, some of the positive learnings were that folks were really quickly able to react and push multiple things at once. So I think sometimes especially in movement spaces, we get caught up with like trying to find the silver bullet and the thing that will do everything all at once. But sometimes, resources are precious. People's lives are at stake. There's a lot of vulnerability. There's a lot of risk. And there needs to be sometimes some creativity within campaigns that I think we saw in the push for AB 5207 and the subsequent shutdown campaign. So once the law passed, actually, even before it became law, as it was moving through the legislature, all three of the open county facilities ended or backed out of the operations of their contracts. And, there was a lot of retaliation at that time during the closures because ICE was doing everything that it could to actually stop the bill from moving through the legislature. So we saw really, vengeful transfers, people not being allowed, final calls with their attorneys. But advocates and organizers were very present in the shutdown effort, making sure that people at least had a consultation. There were also efforts to get the existing state fund for legal services to represent people even after transfer. So that was
Mhm.
huge because
That's good.
now attorneys who had the money to represent people, if someone was transferred away, there were successful
Mhm.
instances in which people were brought back home and released. So being able to hold multiple things at once, the ban was so critically important, again, because we knew what was coming down the pipe with the request for information.
Mhm.
But as that was moving, it created the political windfall to stop the operations at the 3 county-run jails. And, you know, it really got people being creative and collaborative on the legal services end with, you know, families and organizers who had folks inside. I think the other thing that was a really huge learning that, you know, is it's a lesson that comes from the broader prison justice and prison abolition movement is involving folks that are inside. And Heidi mentioned, you know, there were so many hunger strikes happening. There were so many organizing tactics happening on the inside. And it was also at a time that was, for a lot of folks, pre-vaccine. Being around other people was really risky. We're talking about families and communities that also just don't have paid leave, don't have access to health insurance, things like that. So asking folks to turn out at a mass rally was at that time not always viable. But there were things where people were contributing to commissary funds so that when a rally was happening, someone could call on the outside and actually speak to press live during the rally. There were ways in which people were able to get letters out, hand-drawn pictures of what was happening inside. And, you know, visitation was, of course, limited then, but there were a lot of really creative tactics, again, borrowed from the prison abolition and prison justice movement to make sure that the people who were most impacted and who were really leading from the inside, that we were able to sort of break down that wall in the movement space to make sure voices were heard, and pushing things, even though, you know, they can't testify in Trenton, of course, but you know, every time lawmakers were opening their inboxes, there were headlines about people giving their own testimony about what conditions were like on the inside or how their hunger strike was being broken up or threatened.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Amy, just for that reminder of like the amount of creativity that was required of us when the pandemic first started. I think it's just like a great reminder of like how we are implementing like those moments into what we're doing now, especially during what is going to be an election year, which goes into my next question. If you could end us off on this, why do you think like this year specifically, 2024, is a critical moment for people to be rededicating themselves to the immigrant rights movement? If you'd speak a little bit more on that.
Yeah, you know, I think for those of us that have been in this space for a long time, like 2016 to 2020 were really bitter years because it seemed like everyone was suddenly like awakened to just how cruel our immigration system is. And it's like it's been like this, and it was great because it was a boon time for welcoming new folks to the movement, you know, shoring up resources, you know, doing that public education and that sort of like big tent organizing. But you know, and we even saw it here in the shutdown campaigns as it, you know, as the Biden administration took hold, people were kind of like, oh, it's fixed now. And even to this day, you know, toward the tail end of the first term of his administration, that still is the dominant attitude amongst folks that are, you know, maybe not as far along in their political analysis. But the Biden administration has been just as deadly, devastating, and you know, dastardly when it comes to immigration detention and deportation as the Trump administration was. And it's just
Didn't
really
they start like with 15,000 people in ICE detention, and now we're approaching like 40,000 people? So like
yeah.
Biden really did have an opportunity to shift us away, like he, you know, on the campaign trail really promised to shift us away from ICE detention, but now we're seeing those numbers like creep up to devastating
Yeah,
levels.
we went
Yeah,
from historic lows back to historic highs.
historic highs, yeah.
And
And a historic amount of money. He's asking for like the most amount of money that that a president has ever requested for ICE detention in history. So
yeah,
hard.
and let's be clear is that every time New Jersey has passed a law to limit ICE's presence in the state, first when we passed the Immigrant Trust Directive in 2017, and now with AB 5207, the Trump administration sued us over a sanctuary state policy, and the Biden administration did too. They've joined in the core civic lawsuit to allow private immigration detention to continue. And that's really scary, right? Because again, I think the public attention to the issue and media's attention to the issue has really shifted. Immigration is no longer a cause that people are sympathetic to. There's been a lot of hysteria about asylum, about how people are able to come here, and the failings of the system that allow people to fall out of status and still be, punished and criminalized and deported and have their families separated. So, there's a lot of I know I'm like far off from where we started with the
No, it's
question, but I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
like political education that we need to do. Not necessarily, those that are deep in the community and are, working with folks and have that lived experience. Like we know what's up, but I do think that we need to start working toward that big tent space again. And it's going to start with political education because, we need public opinion on our side to be able to move things. That's how AB 5207 was so successful. And again, that windfall that resulted in the closures, that's because of the political education that happened. But, things change quickly and memories are short, but we don't have a lot of time. And, whether it's the Trump administration taking a second term or the Biden administration taking the second term, immigration is going to look really, really similar either way. And we can't afford that.
Thank you so much, Amy, just for putting everything into context and demystifying, this hysteria that really happens, even though like we've been seeing similar policies come from both sides of the aisle. So we are going to turn to question. Is this a question for Amy? Okay. Let's see. So Marlene Paredes, who was shouted out earlier in the show, says, "Can you ask Amy about the council person that was so hateful to organizers and community members? I think it was in Hudson County. Was it to see how was it to see all these Democrats try to keep and expand the status quo? If you feel comfortable."
Yeah. Oh
bringing it
gosh, this is such a great question. And I think it actually touches on that like memories are so short. So there were there were county commissioners. So they were the ones who were responsible for renewing the contract. And they were extremely, all Democrats, but extremely vengeful, saying the worst type of rhetoric that you could imagine. I think during one of the public hearings, they made a DACA recipient cry because of how terrible they were. But there's two people in particular that I want to name. Anthony Veneri, who is now head of Hudson County Democrats, and Anthony Romano. And he's also a county commissioner. And I think both of them are worth naming because of just how vitriolic their language was. Another person that I'll name is Craig Guy, who, folks are pushing and who is the county executive for Hudson County. But those three were really, really steering the ship in terms of, trying to expand the contract, pushing this vitriolic rhetoric. But I think in your question about Democrats and keeping and expanding the status quo, folks may remember back in 2020 that organizers were asking local mayors to come out against the contract, just as they had at the last contract renewal. And Jersey City Mayor Fulop didn't say anything. And Hoboken Mayor Ravi Bala didn't say anything either. And actually, after the contract was extended and then ended, Ravi Bala was like in full support of Anthony Romano and like his position within the county party. But now we have that same mayor of Hoboken who couldn't put out a statement, just couldn't even say anything against the contract, is now running for Congress and proudly claiming that he's a son of immigrants and wants to represent this immigrant-rich district. So, I think the political education and the political analysis is really important, not even at the federal level. Like people need to apply these lenses to their local politicians because the ways in which they contradict themselves and manipulate the public into believing they are or aren't on their side has really, really dangerous consequences.
I wonder if you could also speak to what we've seen in the last few years. You were talking about some of the really vitriolic rhetoric and actions during the height of this campaign from local Democratic officials directed at immigrants, particularly folks who were detained. And just in the last couple of years, we've seen I would argue, a resurgence of that in New Jersey, where you have, mayor of Edison, various officials from Atlantic City, and really a lot of folks from all over the place. These are largely Democratic officials, many of whom previously branded themselves as progressive, now echoing hard right Trump rhetoric, and saying viciously xenophobic and racist things about members of their community in New Jersey. And I wonder what you think that signifies about the political struggle ahead, and how you think New Jersey politics have shifted since Joe Biden was elected.
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that we all need to have, because ultimately it's not going to come down to one party solving the problems for us. And even as you know, AB 5207 was so critically important, and we had to use the power structures that exist because we're talking about a law that bans things from happening, right? But that doesn't mean that laws or the court system or any of those things are actually going to deliver the world that we want. And so it's really important to recognize when someone is a strategic ally, but that there are no permanent friends and there are no permanent enemies either, even amongst themselves. As I mentioned, the situation in Hudson County. So I think, being aware of who the power players are, where the power sits is really important, but not being bought in to that being the world that's going to deliver justice for our communities. And I think we see that divide a lot in the movement where people are either have this sort of like fierce loyalty to a particular party that we just need to back these folks because they're better than the alternative. And that's not always true. It's often untrue. But I think on the flip side, we also see we need to ignore those people. They're not part of our movement. They don't have our back. So like, it's not worthwhile to figure out who's in power or who we can use to our advantage. I think organizers benefit from being smart and exploiting systems as they are, even as much as we try to overturn and change them. And I think we can't be either overly bought in or overly dismissive. To ignore the fact that this is the world as it is means that we would also ignore opportunities to push things like the ban that we pushed. So yeah, I think, we can't be bought into just elections, but elections are times when the people in power are very vulnerable. So thinking about how we exploit those moments to our advantage is good.
For sure. Amy, thank you so much for just the wealth of knowledge that you offered. I know it is much appreciated for the people that we have in our chat. I see Marlene, Anna, Lari, all in agreement that we want ICE out of the state, that we want the Elizabeth Detention Center closed, and the fact that we're going to have to be really creative and we're going to have to work on multiple fronts and make sure that we're working together so that the burden just doesn't fall just on one organization or on one person. But yeah, I also wanted just to thank the two Torres ladies that we have here, Heidi Torres and Amy Torres, just for joining us today and for their time. Literally just an incredible wealth of knowledge that you both brought to the show today. So thank you so much for just being part of our first episode today. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, so we're definitely learning as we go. So this was our first episode. We will definitely be back with future episodes that go into the specifics about Core Civic, about the Elizabeth Detention Center. And we also have some guests that are going to be here from different facilities across the country that are also operated by Core Civic. So folks out in New Mexico specifically and other Core Civic facilities who also have prisons out in Tennessee. So it's not just immigration detention that we'll invite on the show. It's also tapping into our criminal justice homies and on the fight that they're doing for there. So we do want to, well, Andre, do you want to add anything at the end of our first show? And I could pass it to Heidi too.
Sure. So first of all, I just want to thank the audience for bearing with us. We hope you'll tune in to future episodes to continue learning about CoreCivic, this really repugnant private prison organization that does detain a substantial number of immigrants, as well as Elizabeth Detention Center, which is now the last detention center in New Jersey. And as Heidi said, to learn from community members throughout the country who are fighting to shut down detention centers in their community. And if you are in New Jersey and would like to get involved with the fight to shut down Elizabeth Detention Center, please reach out to Movimiento Cosecha on all of the social media channels. And I should also note that, Amy was talking about how we really need to build power and not just rely on elected officials. And in fact, on May Day, there will be a rally in Princeton, which Heidi can tell you more about, and another one in Newark.
And maybe Maryland too. I think we're gonna bring up the flyer. Okay. Ooh, yeah. So nice flyer. So yeah, we're still showing up. We're still demanding a free Palestine. In Elizabeth, actually, they're also trying to pass like a ceasefire resolution. So head out to Elizabeth City Council meetings, not only to demand the closure of Elizabeth Detention Center, but also for a ceasefire resolution. And then on May 1st at, okay, what did they say? At 5:30 p.m., there's going to be a rally at the, what does it say? Fountain. Oh my God, hold on. Let me pull it up. Fountain of Freedom. Thank you. The Fountain of Freedom in Princeton, New Jersey at 5:30. So make sure you get out there. You're in solidarity with your fellow workers and also El Pueblo Palestino to show your solidarity on that day. I can pass it to Heidi.
Yeah, I think just I will see all of you guys on May 1st. I'm very excited. One of the demands that is a collective demand, right, from all of us is the ceasefire, right, and also a shutdown of the Elizabeth Detention Center. But not only the shutdown, I think we talked about this. It's just like release. Right, we don't want any more transfers, right? I want release from everybody who's been detained right now, who's currently detained at EDC. So come out, the fights, no, it's not gonna stop. Summer is, it's getting warmer, so that means that there's gonna be more activities on the ground. So we're excited for all that is to come, and if everybody who's watching, please share this video because we need more episodes like this, right? Or like venues like this where we can learn more about our enemy and also understand about the collective power. Because I feel like every day that we wake up in the news, it's like something terrible is happening. But then you turn around and see your friends doing small actions or organizing mutual aid groups or like putting this show together, right? Like, and I feel those are all different ways for us to create community and also create resistance, right? So like the dominant news outlets, right, that we see every day, right? So thanks, appreciate both of you for taking the time and all the production at Radio Jornalera, right, for helping us all behind the scenes. You guys are amazing.
You guys are amazing. So yes, make sure to follow Radio Jornalera, Radio Cosecha, support your local community media, your alternative media, because this is where the stories are going to be told the way that we want them to. Yeah. Awesome. Gracias, Heidi. Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Desde abajo se defiende a todo mundo. Radio Jornalera, donde tu voz encuentra un eco amplificado, donde tus derechos salen a la luz y disipan el miedo, donde tus aportes a la sociedad se evidencian, donde se reconoce que tus luchas reivindican derechos para todas y todos. Radio Jornalera destaca a la gente humilde que pelea por sus derechos a pesar de sus circunstancias de despojo y marginación. Eleva a los individuos y sus luchas y muestra cómo la clase trabajadora y humilde puede ser agente de cambio cuando se organiza, cuando se defiende y cuando tiene una lectura correcta de su propia realidad. Radio Jornalera provee el espacio para aprender de los invitados e invitadas sobre sus vidas, lo que les motiva a seguir adelante, sus virtudes y desafíos y hasta su música y poesía favorita. Radio Jornalera recalca el trabajo de activistas, organizadores, educadores y algunas celebridades, sus causas, sus campañas, sus estrategias, sus tácticas y los reveses más duros en el perenne quehacer de formar líderes para hacer el mundo más justo, más humano, más inclusivo. Para cambiar el mundo, primero hay que conocer a las personas que sobreviven las injusticias y políticas públicas groseras. Hay que apoyar y solidarizarse con sus luchas, porque desde abajo se defiende a todo mundo. Radio Jornalera, donde los anhelos y el sentir del pueblo trabajador cobran vida.